You're listening in on an animated discussion about Batman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from the Cinemetropolis.com. And today's topic is Season 1, Episode 64, Read My Lips. Joshua, I find talking dolls a bit traumatizing.
Yeah, you don't say.
I saw too many Chucky movies on Sci-Fi Channel at too young an age, and it might have wrecked me. So
the room full of dolls and Poltergeist, it's not good. It's not good.
Why do we keep making dolls? Why do we keep doing it? They're creepy inherently. I mean, are there people out there who think they're not creepy?
I think there's a complicated space here, right? Where the reason that children like to play with dolls is because they are a lifeless thing that they can imbue a certain amount of life in with their imaginations.
That's true.
As you get older, we tend to give that a more sinister air, but it's still really the same thing. That's a lifelike thing that I am imbuing with life via my imagination.
I am projecting negative imagination.
But now it's negative.
Ooh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the genius of the ventriloquist as a villain.
I agree, because I think playing on the idea of dolls are scary because of the things we project onto them is the perfect idea for a great Batman villain.
It's great because that menace is being projected on Scarface from multiple directions.
Yes.
So, I mean, you're getting it obviously from Batman and from the other criminals.
And then from Wesker.
Also from Wesker. Yeah. Wesker is literally projecting his own criminal tendencies onto a doll. It's just shockingly interesting. Like,
and that's what
makes
dolls
so weird.
Dolls, lifeless, soulless things that exist, but yet the thing we project onto them is what gives them power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Great psychological pre-game talk, Joshua. But I think we need to go ahead and start looking at this title card because
that's the downside. None of this makes it into the title card.
I actually like this title card.
It's okay.
But I will say, I like it, but that's because I know exactly what this episode's about. This title card tells you, if you've never seen this episode before or don't know who the ventriloquist is, it tells you nothing about the episode whatsoever. So it's not very good.
It doesn't even do a great job of telling you that it's going to be a ventriloquist dummy. Like, if you weren't looking closely, you might not, because it's from behind.
Right.
It's his head from behind, without hair and without a body. So it's not impenetrable to discover that it is a dummy's head. But it's also not super obvious, right?
I feel like this would be a better title card for the second ventriloquist episode.
I agree.
Because we see at the end of this episode that he's carving the Two-Faced doll.
Yes.
So we like, if you plant that in the viewer's minds, if they've already seen that episode, they're going to see this image and be like, oh, this is a callback to that. But this is the first episode. It's weird. It's a very strange choice.
I don't know what would be a better choice, honestly, because
do a Scarface, do a close-up. I mean, it wouldn't be great. but
a close-up of the doll face?
The doll face, yeah, in front of blackness. I don't know. It would be great, but it'd be better.
Well, actually, that might, depending on the music choice and some other things, if they kind of played up the horror angle a little bit in the title card, that actually could be great. I mean, again, we just got done talking about doll faces are terrifying. So here's one that maybe looks cute, except that the light's wrong, so it looks mean and also has a literal scar carved into it. Yeah, that would have been better. This one's a little too clever by half. We'll put it that way, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if I can't
decide.
Not great. I mean, again, I like the idea, but not a great title card.
So this is another one like Maxi Zeus that I'm curious about your interaction with before BTAS. Because he's a backbencher. The ventriloquist is a backbencher. Even in Batman's very impressive rogues gallery.
No, and here's the funny thing is I don't really recall having much interaction with him outside of Batman the Animated Series. Again, the Arkham trilogy of games, he gets cameos in. He's
around.
He's in Arkham Asylum. The Joker carries him around at the end, and then I think it's the first one. No. Or maybe it's Arkham City.
I think it's Arkham City.
Well, because he shows up at a couple places in Arkham City. Because he also shows up. Scarface the doll, not the ventriloquist. I don't think the ventriloquist shows up anywhere in those games.
I don't think
so. So I mean, he's in. I do know he's in the Batman, right? right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
there
he's
is a
weird
version of
because it's
him
a
in the
giant, because he's a giant walking mech thing, at least in the episode I saw.
Eventually, yeah.
Eventually. That's the episode I saw. Sorry, I recall. So I've seen...
No. That makes me sigh because longtime listeners have heard me say that the Batman is highly underrated, but sometimes what it was doing gets in its own way, and turning the ventriloquist dummy into a mech is an example of that.
Yeah.
It's fine. It knew what it was doing, and usually that was something very interesting, but a couple of times it was like, well, I know how this happened, but it doesn't make me happy. So, yeah, but he is, it's not a surprise. I really think that he shows up in the Batman almost entirely because he becomes something of a fan favorite villain from BTAS.
Yeah, no, I think BTAS is what makes this character. And I'm just going to say, too, I mean, not that it needs to be said, but much like Maxi Zeus, this is a character that I find deeply disturbing.
He really is.
The psychology is, oh, man.
He is the one I was alluding to in our Maxi Zeus episode when I said, I think there's somebody even more tragic than Maxi.
He's just
Wesker.
He's just a dude who's got a split personality disorder and projects it onto a doll. And like, because we only really see Wesker's sweeter personality, who's
but we know that he's got this whole other side.
Oh yeah,
like we see it.
Oh yeah.
And what's more, for me, the worst part of that is that Wesker's evil tendencies, they don't even hate his good tendencies. They just think they're beneath him.
Right.
The way Scarface treats Wesker is so dismissive. Like, it's an abusive relationship.
Well, it's weird.
That he's in with his other personality.
It's bonkers because he always refers to him as, the ventriloquist. Bring the ventriloquist. Like, he's a dumb, weak. I mean, he is a kind of a comparative. He's weaker. He's not got muscle. He's not going to kill anybody.
Except through Scarface.
Except through Scarface, exactly. But it's really weird how you get in the head. Yes, the dominant personality is abusive to the submissive personality. And it's really strange, which is, of course, how Batman ends up beating him.
That's right. They're so deep in... I said there. That's not right. Wesker is so deep in his dual psychosis that Scarface refuses to reckon with the fact that the ventriloquist is the source of his life, right? And therefore, they are in a paranoid relationship with one another, right? Like they don't trust one another.
Well, no,
despite that they are parts of the same person.
Well, the first time you see the Scarface, he says, "I don't know why, but I think one of you is a traitor." You know what I mean?
Exactly,
like there's a mole. Like
yes.
the first time before Batman even shows up. And so obviously there's that built-in paranoia.
Yeah. And I think it starts with Scarface not trusting Wesker.
Yes.
Like, I can't get rid of you, but I can't let myself understand why.
But also, I'm not even going to acknowledge that I can't get rid of you. Because he tries to kill him. Like he says at the end of the episode, he's like, kill him. I'm like, okay, it's not going to work.
That's not how this works. Yeah, it's really good. And a lot of that pathos and weirdness has been present in the character since his first appearance in the comic books. He's not really, I'm going to be honest with you, he's not really that interesting in the comic books. Like, I mean, everything that's interesting about him in the comics makes it into BTAS. There have been some other ventriloquists. They have nothing to do with Wesker, so I'm going to let those slide.
Yeah, because there are multiple ventriloquists.
Yes, but Wesker's the original, and he is also a relatively recent addition. Even more recent than Maxi Zeus. He's 1988.
Oh, wow. So not long before BTAS at all. Less than a decade.
Yeah. I'm going to put a pin in this, but if I had to bet on a little bar trivia right now, I think Wesker and Scarface are the most recently created villains in the comic books to make it into BTAS. I don't think anybody else even comes close.
Yeah, I got to think on that one. But
I really don't think so. I mean, there's a weird in-between space for Harley Quinn.
Yeah, but she's not in the comics. She's not in the comics
at all. Right, she's original to the show, but I think everybody else is decades before Maxi, who is a decade before Wesker. So that's fascinating. And just for the record, because I like a couple of these creators a lot, he was created by John Wagner, Alan Grant, and Norm Brayfogle. And I am a big fan of both Grant and Brayfogle. So I wanted to get their names in there.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's a really good addition to Batman's Rogues Gallery, which tends to hinge on madness.
Right.
Right? But we don't have a lot of multiple personalities.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's what I find interesting about Scarface is because we all know that that's really the key to what makes Batman's rogues gallery one of the best is because they're all driven by the psyche, the psychological angle.
Yeah.
And we even talked when we built the show, like the whole cracked mirror idea of like, where is this character similar but different?
Yes.
And this is a character that takes that even further, even more literal. Like we're looking at someone who's actually broken into multiple personalities.
Right. I mean, I make a big deal about it often that Batman and Bruce Wayne are not like two halves of the same person. They're just the same guy code switching. Right? I mean, sometimes I have to be this person. Sometimes I have to be that person. It's perhaps a little more self-aware a code switch than most of us do. But still, that's all it is. It's not an actual duality.
No,
when you take that to a ridiculous extreme,
Yes.
it becomes and make it villainous.
Yeah, it
you
is
get
a
the
ventriloquist, a dual personality. I like that Scarface. He's based off of like a classic mobster type, not like the Scarface from the movie, weirdly at all.
So okay. Oh,
Now
I get to do a little bit of education for film to the film guy?
You can do that. You can do that. You can throw it out there because it was Scarface is based on an even older concept.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
He is
But I would
very
think,
much the 1930s.
Yes.
The original film Scarface, not Al Pacino's.
No.
Which is admittedly better. I love Al Pacino's Scarface.
Yes. I should clarify that. Yes, no. I just would think this coming out as close to the Al Pacino Scarface that they would have at least had more nods to that sort of story, which weirdly the Batman does more.
Right. The Batman goes hard for that version of
Al
Scarface.
Pacino. Yeah. So no. But the original Scarface is a 1930s character. No. Yeah. Al Pacino.
Very
Al Pacino
famous before it was remade and basically got eclipsed by Al Pacino's.
Yes,
which is
correct.
I don't want to say as it should be because the original Scarface has many things to its own credit.
Yes.
But just looking at different times, I'm going to go Al Pacino.
They definitely adapted. They definitely adapted what worked about the original Scarface very well to the 1980s, 70s and 80s.
And I wonder if that's why Wesker goes more towards the Edward G. Robinson.
Because it's more theatrical,
Scarface.
Right?
Well, it's also in 1988, Al Pacino's Scarface was definitely well known, right? A critical darling, but I'm not sure that had become a cultural touchstone in that short of time in the way that like old school Al Capone style gangsters remain.
Then that's true. In the zeitgeist of the time,
I'm not sure.
I would
interesting.
I would bet gangsters. I would bet in the 80s that gangsters were still thought of as a more of the Al Capone. I think it's more theatrical. I don't know. It feels weird saying that Al Pacino's Scarface is not theatrical because it is kind of over the top. But I mean, there is something about the theatrics and the aesthetic of the original Scarface that just feels like a lot more Batman.
Yeah, you have to get superhero concepts and supervillain concepts at a glance. We have to do it at a glance, right? Like we get at a glance. We don't know all of Joker stuff, but we know right away that's an evil clown. Right, we get it.
Yes.
We don't know exactly all of the Riddler stuff, but we hear the word Riddler and we see a bunch of question marks, and we can kind of get it. Even with your good guys, right? With Batman, okay, we get what's going on there. This is somebody who is fighting darkness with darkness. We do the same thing with Superman or Spider-Man. I mean, that's a big deal for superhero media. You got to get it at a glance, and I feel like looking at 1988 when Wesker's introduced compared to how recent in time Al Pacino's Scarface was, that rendition of Scarface would not have been as at a glance as a 1930s gangster would have been. That's very interesting.
I think so because that's the thing about Scarface, the Al Pacino Scarface, is that he looked more like an average guy, right? I mean, a little fancier. Okay, he dressed fancier, but like he looks like you look like in the 80s. You look at him and you say, I could encounter him in the street somewhere potentially.
True. Yeah.
You're not going to run into just 1930s Scarface in the street somewhere. Like,
no, not
the
anymore.
idea of a mobster was still
true.
in the zeitgeist, and the way it existed in the imagination
and Tommy guns and stuff like that. You are going to see this drift because the Batman wants to do something in contrast to BTAS because it has to, and so whether it likes it or not, it's going to do Al Pacino's.
Yes.
You also get this roll forward into the DCAU in a way, not with the ventriloquist, but with the visuals of what a gangster is.
Oh, yes.
Because we see, well, boy, will we get to this down the road, but you see in flashbacks for the Huntress's origin, her dad has always been a mobster.
Right.
In the comic books, he's a very sort of traditional Italian-American style mobster. But for the DCAU, when we flash back, it's so obviously Al Pacino from Scarface.
That's
it hurts.
so funny.
So, but again, look at that. The difference in time, there is another 10 or 15 years between this episode of BTAS and that episode of Justice League. So now what do we think of as gangster? A dated gangster? Al Pacino.
Al Pacino.
Yeah. Very cool.
Very cool. Interesting to see how this universe is really reflecting the popular imagination at the time, and pop culture at the time. So very cool. Now, I do want to just throw in there, we should talk a little bit about the episode itself.
Definitely.
I mean, like the events of the episode, because I found that the reveal of Scarface was really clever. Mm-hmm. Whenever Batman's watching, he's tracking down the Rhino, which, by the way, the Rhino is just kind of hilarious anyway.
Yeah.
Runs at the way he walks and runs at people.
The core gang, Scarface's core gang, is a holdover from the comic books, I believe, or if not his first appearance, a very early appearance that he worked with a specific gang, and Rhino was one of them. He needed a bruiser, so here he is.
Well, I like he goes back and he says, we need to talk to the boss. Batman's involved. And then it's just a clever mislead, because if you had never seen this episode or you didn't know who the ventriloquist was or who Scarface was, it would be shocking, just like it is for Batman.
That was what I thought was most clever about that reveal, is that we get Batman's shocked.
And Batman's
reaction.
seen a lot of crazy stuff.
Yes.
And him being shocked is you're like, whoa, this is screwed up.
Even for Gotham, this is a hot mess.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was really clever. And I also want to point out that the second half of this episode all is essentially a single location confrontation.
That's true. Yeah. In the mannequin factory, which is an interesting choice. Yeah, it really does trade on that creepiness of dolls that we're talking about, but in such an oblique way. Because it's almost like we get the thematic tie between Scarface and the mannequins, but Scarface does not.
Scarface doesn't.
Either
it's all
it was subconscious for Wesker that he chose that place, or they do not get the irony of it. But we get it.
Oh, we totally get it. I think it works either way you want to have it either. Yeah. Because
if it just deepens Wesker's madness so that he's so into it, even he's not grokking the fact that he's...
But he doesn't realize. He's like, we're just going to do it in a doll factory because that makes sense.
And there are some ironic beats to the relationship between Wesker and Scarface that suggest maybe he's not great at irony, like the fact that Scarface refers to him as dummy.
Dummy, yeah, yeah. Okay, so here's another question, too, I want to throw at you. So there are scenes in which I can't tell, is this from Batman's perspective? Because there are scenes where, and I know ventriloquists can toss their voice a little bit, but there's that scene where Batman's interrogating Wesker, and then you can hear Scarface from the other room shouting, and Batman doesn't react, but Wesker does. So I'm like, are we hearing the inside of what's going on in his head?
So part of ventriloquist skills are throwing your voice. Usually it's just a foot or so. A thing that most people may not know is that ventriloquism as an art form begins in very small live venues, most famously in vaudeville, right? Like there have been ventriloquists and puppet shows since forever. I mean, medieval Europe, well known for them, your Punch and Judy's, but all the way back to like ancient China.
Oh, yes.
These are an ongoing part of humanity. But ventriloquism, as we know it, began in these small, intimate places like a vaudeville theater. So you really did, as part of that skill set, need it to sound like it was coming from somebody a foot or so to your left or right.
Right.
Because that would matter to the people in the front row. And so the ability to then throw it further, so that modulating your tone, I have no idea how, but modulating your tone and the volume, it would sound like it was coming from a whole different part of the room or even a different room. So I think we're supposed to be hard in Batman's POV, and that is how good a ventriloquist Wesker is.
Okay.
That's what I think.
That's what
it's supposed to add to the creep factor.
Yes, I think it's because I think it's really ambiguous, and I think no matter how you spin it, it's really creepy.
Yeah.
Because my initial thought was, he's just tossing his voice, because I know that's a thing a ventriloquist can do. But then I'm like, man, but the way Batman's not reacting in the same way that Wesker is, and they're in totally separate rooms, I'm just like, oh, maybe we're just hearing the inside of his head and he's crazy. Which is even more disturbing.
There's certainly a place we could read it that way. I don't know that most of the episode expects us. There's nothing textual.
That's why.
Put us in that space,
right?
Especially when you look at Alfred and Batman's conversation about the voices and that the computer can't even tell the difference
Right.
in the recording. I think we're supposed to be hard in Batman's POV, and that is how good Wesker is and how far around the bend he is.
Right.
Yeah.
Toss his voice into another room. It's impressive.
Yeah. And I mean, I have no idea if that's remotely realistic. I don't know enough about ventriloquism
no, me
to
neither.
know.
Yeah.
But I know enough for that to be a reasonable stretch.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, no, totally. It's not unreasonable. I just thought there were some interesting choices they made with the animation. Again, the way Batman did not react to certain things, and Wesker did. Like, it was interesting, and I felt like I like the ambiguity a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I generally think it's from Batman's point of view, but it felt like a weird adjustment.
Yeah. Because by then like the reveal's been made, and if you're gonna. I bet no one who just watched this episode, even if they watched it 100 times, necessarily thought that. But I do catch myself on these close watches going, wait a minute, whose point of view is this?
Right.
But I do also think it sets up Batman's win at the end, that he's able to, that there is some throwing it several feet away.
Okay, yeah. So that's the other thing. So Batman wins. I mean, this is kind of we had a similar conversation about Two-Face.
He does this a lot.
Batman
does this a lot.
He applies the pressure, the psychological pressure on where he knows it's going to hit him the hardest, so he can beat them. And I was like, dang, this guy is so screwed up, and Batman's just.
I mean, just like we talked about with Two-Face, I'd like to believe that the character of Batman does not do this with wanton cruelty.
Oh, no, not at all.
It is cruel. Like, it is hurtful to leverage someone's sickness against them. At the same time, these are very dangerous people.
Right.
I mean, in this case, it's more about theft than it is about murders. It's not people directly in danger other than Batman himself. And usually there's not even a question about this, because when Batman does this, it's to save lives, right? Other than his own.
Yes.
So this leaves us a little more gray area we could talk about.
Well, but yeah, he was trying to save his own life, because we don't
and
actually.
He does have to stop this man.
Yes.
He's not well. He should not be out among the people. And also, not for nothing, Scarface is a really good mastermind criminal. I don't need mastermind criminals running around my city.
No. I mean, well, it's only a matter of time before someone is getting hurt, too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he carries a tiny Tommy gun for crying.
That actually is loaded. Which, by the way, when I saw it move, I was like, oh my God, there it is.
So yeah, I love that bit. I remembered that conversation between us too about how often Batman uses the psychosis of his enemy against them. I mean, it's a thing he, to some extent, teaches to the rest of the Bat family, because I made mention in a superhero university about Batgirl of Burnside that Batgirl does that to someone, leverages their madness against them. She learns at the knee of Batman.
Yes, I mean, that is part of the.
I liked it.
I mean, that's part of the ambiguity of what Batman does. Is it okay to do that? I don't know. I mean, it's up for you to decide. Like, is that too cruel? Is it? But it's effective.
That's why I think that difference. So I don't know that there's a right answer, but I know that last time you and I talked about this, there were innocent people's lives in danger with Two-Face.
Yes.
Right? Like Grace, if nothing else, was right there to be murdered. And in that case, I feel like, yeah, you save the life and you worry about the ethics later, right? If we wanted to really dive into the is it okay question, this is a much grayer space.
Because no one was immediately in danger other than Batman himself.
And he kind of, knew what he was signing up for.
Yeah. Definitely.
So I don't think we need to answer that, but it is interesting that we get that same question with a different context that might lead us to a different answer. Mm-hmm. It's pretty cool.
Can I also note that Batman chops Scarface's hand off with a batarang? And I was like, that was the moment where I was like, I know it's a doll, but at the same time, it was like kind of, it felt gruesome. I was like, this is children's television.
It does feel gruesome. It does. You're right. But at the same time, you have Scarface almost non-reacting. Yeah. I'm hit, boys. I mean, the humor of it, I think, like sucks the poison of the gruesome right out.
It was so funny.
But you're right. There's a context.
There was like, you just see this hand like fall off. I was like, what? I don't know. Like, it just hit me really weird. But it also, he plays it like a punchline.
So I'd like to jump to the end of the episode before we close out with our other media.
Yeah, I mean, just as eerie as the rest of the episode.
It really is. And there were two things that I noticed. One is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but oh man, the therapists at Arkham are negligent. This is not an activity that you should be letting Arnold Wesker take part in.
You guys are not paying attention.
Not woodworking.
Not woodworking, not creating dolls. He didn't even look at what he was carving. He's like, oh, that's great. That's great.
It's very good work. He's just calm. The other thing that's much less tongue-in-cheek is really looking at Wesker's madness here, is that earlier in the episode, we saw nothing but a giant, thick, dark line between the personalities of Scarface and Wesker. And we saw Scarface willing to murder Wesker.
Right.
And we saw Wesker reacting to Scarface, the doll getting shot up, as though it were an actual human being.
Right. Very upsetting, honestly.
However, here in this moment, we see that Wesker is, with planning, making a new Scarface.
Right, because he needs Scarface. That's a part of his
Scarface.
personality. He needs to survive, to thrive. I don't know. He needs that because he is the submissive half of the personality, and that's what makes him feel empowered.
And the question then to me, which there's no textual evidence for this, it's just a fun thought about this psychology, is the question is he aware of what he's doing at that point, or is he so disassociated that later he will wake up and there will be a finished Scarface and he will not remember all the work that he put into it?
Man, that is the question, and it's also kind of terrifying to think about.
Either answer is differently terrifying, like that he can just accept that problem and make a new version of this dominant.
Or does he have like these big periods of time where he can't remember making
Can't remember making it. Doesn't even remember being in the workshop. Doesn't remember sewing the clothes. Oh my gosh, it's terrifying.
Ooh, goosebumps right here. Well, Joshua, this has been a great talk. And I just have to say, I am deeply upset by this character. It was one of those things I remember when I was a kid thinking, this is kind of creepy. Now as an adult, I'm like, man, this is even worse. It's way worse. But
when he shows up again, it will be just as creepy again. And then he'll show up again. I may be missing something.
I think he's like 3 or 4 times.
But then he also shows up in one that is just deeply and painfully tragic all over again. It's when Wesker shows up, it's a trip every time.
So yeah, I'll look forward to those episodes.
Yes.
But in the meantime, what are some alternate media recommendations you'd have for the listener?
So there is an interesting series on Amazon Prime. It's an original series that Amazon created for itself, but it's based on a podcast called Lore.
I have both listened to Lore and watched some of the show.
It's kind of a deep dive into some creepier part of the human experience. You know, you might get an episode about werewolves or about electroshock therapy. There is an episode called Unboxed in the first season on Amazon Prime that deals with haunted dolls in general, but actually one particular very famous haunted doll. That's all I'm going to say because I don't want anyone who's unaware of this to go into this episode knowing anything.
Is it related to Annabelle?
We're not talking about it because it's creepy. No, it's not that one.
Okay, good.
So I generally recommend, I haven't actually listened to the podcast, much to my surprise, but I generally recommend the series on Amazon. It's not great, but it's very interesting. The art direction's kind of, just okay, but I always came out being a little creeped out and having learned something. But late in the first season, the episode Unboxed, all about haunted dolls, seems very on point for Scarface.
Unboxed. Ooh, man. Dolls are creepy, guys.
It is.
Dolls
are
so creepy. So I've got 2 recommendations for you, Joshua. I've got one that is a crime film recommendation and one that is a doll film recommendation. And I hate doll films. So we'll start with the doll films. So there's a director out there you may or may not have heard of. His name is James Wan. He may or may not be directing one of the biggest movies of the year that's about to I guess by the time this post, Aquaman. He directed Aquaman.
Yeah.
But before he directed Aquaman and Furious 7 or Fast and Furious 7 or what it was called, horror film director, Saw being his kind of big breakout hit. He did another film that I feel like gets buried under his other really popular horror films called Dead Silence. And it is all about haunted ventriloquist. Oh, man. Yeah. If you like this episode or you find the idea of dolls messing with people's heads.
If you like this idea, but this episode wasn't terrifying enough, here's Dead Silence.
Or if you like to terrify yourself and torture yourself, go watch Dead Silence because it amps up a lot of the stuff we're talking about here. And it kind of rides the line of like, is this supernatural? Is this psychological? What's even going on? We don't know. Because it's kind of like a mystery. We're going to figure out what the mystery of this... Well, I don't want to spoil the movie, but it's a mystery.
Yes.
It's a mystery. Like you're kind of slowly learning things. And there's all these questions that rise about whether this is supernatural, whether it's real, and if it's real, who's behind it. Oh, we think it's this person or that person. It's a great little film.
This
it's
actually
very
sounds
atmospheric.
like some of the questions that get asked about later versions of the ventriloquist in the comic books. I'm not going to say much more because I may have some reason to get to them some other time. At me on Twitter. But that whole, is it Wesker or is it Scarface or is it a little of both, feels like there could be some of those kinds of questions going on in Dead Silence.
Or is Wesker just making all of it up? Maybe he's very sane. I don't know.
Ooh.
I don't know. That is James Wan's 2007 film Dead Silence. Again, it was his first film, I believe, after Saw, and it was also before he did The Conjuring and Insidious. Both of those have a lot of love. So it was like kind of in the middle, and it just didn't. It's really good. People who've watched it really like it, but it didn't ever get the same mass popularity as his other films. So that's going to be for my doll film recommendation. For my crime film recommendation, I'm going to recommend another movie that nobody saw last year that I thought was really great and fun and also weirdly dark. And it was a single location film, much like the second half of this episode, where it's a bunch of criminals standing around in a room trying to figure out who backstabbed who's the rat, who's the mole. And it is the 2017 film Free Fire, which is super fun because it's got people like Armie Hammer, Charlotte Copley, Brie Larson. It's got a really awesome cast, and it's all in this warehouse, and it happens in real time too. Like I want to say the movie's 108 minutes long, and then like they're actually in there for 108 minutes. It's super cool.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was here in Oklahoma City. It was in one of our theaters for 1 week, so it was like here and gone, boom.
These are actual actors given space to act in a movie like that.
Yes, they're chewing the scenery so hard, all of them. It's set in the 70s too. That's another thing. So it's got like that 70s spy thriller set in a single location. Yeah, Joshua, I think
you're doing something
it.
for me. Yeah. This is all me right here. Yeah.
So again, that's 2017's Free Fire.
I'm going to circle around and do one more as far as creepy dolls, and I'm just going to tell you, listeners, right now, this is fan service for exactly one fan of this show. My son. So I'm going to recommend a video game series. I don't actually play it very much.
I think I know where we're going.
I don't love it, but my son loves the Five Nights at Freddy's series, which is not dolls exactly, but haunted animatronics like the robots from Chuck E. Cheese.
It's wild.
Who are all trying to murder you. And there are, I think, 4 or 5 of these games, but there are also 3 novels and some case files books.
There's novels?
Yes, he has read them. And apparently an extremely deep backstory to how and why they became haunted. And I guess if I'm impressed by any one piece of this, it's the fact that this game with a very loose jump scare resource management play style spun out into all of this deep, terrifying, weird lore. So, Elijah, this one's for you. Everyone, if you're not familiar with Five Nights at Freddy's, I don't know if you should play it. That's a different question.
At least read about it, though.
Definitely read the Wikipedia entries, because there's a lot going on. Well, that about wraps up this animated discussion. Caleb, where can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Well, Joshua, you can always find me on Twitter talking about film, television, video games, and all sorts of other pop culture goodness at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. I'm also the editor-in-chief and film critic at the Cinematropolis, and we publish these in-depth essays on all types of different films, oftentimes including science fiction and superhero films, all the stuff you'd want to read about. And you can find all these articles at thecinematropolis.com. Joshua, what about you?
I'm also most active on Twitter, where you can find me easily enough at Joshua Unruh. And remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions.
I'm very excited to announce that our next animated discussion is Season 1, Episode 65, The Worrymen. Also, according to these Blu-rays / the DC streaming service, the season finale of Season 1.
Until next time, we'll see you back here. Same bad time, same bad channel.